The Letter Writers, or A New Way to Keep a Wife at Home, is a play by Henry Fielding and was first performed on the 24th of March 1731 at Haymarket with its companion piece, The Tragedy of Tragedies. It is about two merchants who strive to keep the wives faithful. Their efforts are unsuccessful, however, until they catch the man who their wives are cheating with. The play, a farce dealing with sex and adultery, was a failure. While Fielding avoided the traditional clichés of the genre, he lost the moral purpose. Critics disagree over the quality of the play, but most agree that the missing moral purpose is the key failure of the play. Background: The Letter Writers, or A New Way to Keep a Wife at Home, a three-act farcical play, was first mentioned in the 12th of February 1731 Daily Post, which announced that the play would start in March. It first ran on the 24th of March 1731, and it ran for 4 nights as a companion piece with The Tragedy of Tragedies. It failed as a play, and the Welsh opera replaced The Letter Writers as the companion piece to The Tragedy of Tragedies on the 22nd of April 1731. It was advertised for print in the 23rd of March Daily Post and first printed the 24th of March for opening night. It was printed by James Roberts with John Watts, even though only Roberts's name appeared on any of the notices. On the same day as The Tragedy of Tragedies, there is a difference in quality between the printed version of The Letter Writers and other plays, including The Tragedy of Tragedies. The play was printed with less care and includes many mistakes in the text along with other errors. Cast list according to the original printed billing: Mr. Wisdom, played by Mr. Jones; Mrs. Wisdom, played by Mrs. Lacey; Mr. Softly, played by Mr. Hallam; Mrs. Softly, played by Mrs. Mullet; Rackle Officer, played by Mr. Lacey; Risque Rackle Servant, played by Mr. Reynolds; Commons Friend of Rackle, played by Mr. Mullet; John, played by Mr. Wadden; Sneaksby, played by Mr. Davenport; Betty, played by Mrs. Stokes. Other characters include constable, whores, fiddlers, servants, and others. Plot: the play revolves around two old merchants named Mr. Wisdom and Mr. Softly. Each has a young wife, and the two men are afraid that the wives will run off with other men. They determine to send a threatening letter to the other's wife to scare them into staying. The letters do not work, and Mrs. Softly spends her time pursuing men about town, while Mrs. Wisdom stays at home with Rackle, an officer. While with Rackle, Mrs. Wisdom is almost caught by Mr. Wisdom, but she is able to sneak him into a closet. Mrs. Softly does not have a closet, and she is caught with Rackle by her husband. After great lengths, she is able to convince him that she was not intimate with Rackle. Rackle pretends to be a criminal, and Risque helps reinforce the lie. However, she is later discovered with Rackle by Mrs. Wisdom after Commons, a friend of Rackle's, comes in drunk and reveals where Rackle was hiding. Themes: the theme of the play is dealing with sex and adultery. However, Fielding ignores many traditional clichés that are part of the sex comedy farce, which causes him to lose out on emphasizing any moral purpose. Instead, Fielding avoids morality, and the play instead forgives characters, such as Risque, who don't seem to deserve forgiveness through the play. In this play, along with the Temple Bow, Rape Upon Rape, and the Grub Street Opera, Fielding relies on letters to further the plot. Other connections between The Letter Writers and other works by Fielding include Fielding's reliance on the events of his day, public or personal, and his ability to take plain events and find humor within them. In the play, the use of writing letters to intimidate people occurred frequently during the early 1730s. However, the play is different from his other works because it is truly farce, whereas whereas many of his other works are more ballad opera than farce. In terms of characters, Mrs. Softly is, according to Ronald Paulson, the first of the vocal and central young women who emerge from Fielding's Molière plays, and serves as the focus for the play. Critical response. There are no contemporary accounts of the play besides it being a failure. According to Thomas Lockwood, removing the letter writers from the billing was a forced decision, made necessarily because the afterpiece was dragging down the program, not an easy accomplishment. Where the program was headed by the tragedy of tragedies, Allard Nichols believes that, in regards to the letter writers, of all 18th century farces, Fielding's is perhaps the best. Robert Hume disagrees with Nichols' assessment and instead believes that the play's gimmick is a good one, but it is ineptly handled. F. Holmes Dudden notes how the letter writers is truly a farce unlike Fielding's other works, but he points out that the play was too conventional to excite much interest. The Battersons believe that, slight as it is and unsuccessful, the letter writers is worth noting for the clarity with which it exemplifies certain characteristics of Fielding's work as a comic author. Harold Pagliaro believes that, despite the happy idea of the husband's letters and the possibilities they generate, the play misses as farce or burlesque, because the outrageous behavior we have been promised, at least implicitly, never comes to pass. A certain audacity is wanting.